everyone, and welcome to the channel. In today's video, we will discuss how to set up your fighting rifle as a special purpose rifle, or as it's more commonly referred to as an SPR. Now, before we delve into my SPR and the choices that I've made on it, whether it's the glass, suppressor, and so on, it is important that we go back a little bit in the history books, just so we can fully understand the concept of the SPR. Now, if you're like me, when you hear SPR, what comes to mind is probably a Mark 12. Mod 0, Mod 1, Mod H, regardless, a Mark 12 comes to mind. And it is a great case study on this sort of rifle. So, for those of you who are not aware, or you've already built out a clone yourself, strap in, we're going to go for a little bit of a history run. The Mark 12 was developed in the early 2000s by SOCOM as a rifle intending to bridge the gap in capabilities between your traditional M4, M16 pattern rifles, and at the time, the M24 sniper rifle and really any other sniper rifle. In essence, we would have a 5.56 rifle that can shoot accurized precision fire compared to the other rifles being used that probably had a red dot or most likely an ACOG on them. You could have an automatic rifle that can create suppressive fire, not just through accurate sniper fire, but also through just volume, sheer volume. With a bolt action rifle, you don't really have that. So in essence, you have a rifle that is trying its best to not corner itself one way or the other, either as a sniper rifle or as just a carbine, sort of an in-between. The way I look at it is, you want to be able to get out to those extended distances with effective precision, right? But you also don't want to compromise your ability to move throughout structures or to be able to engage in a target-rich environment, which a semi-automatic rifle system is definitely an advantage. So the Mark 12, speak on the components, use an 18-inch match-grade stainless steel barrel, which is important. You have to go with an 18-inch or stainless steel barrel. There's a lot of great stuff out there, whether it's cold hammer forged or chrome lined. That said, it is a match-grade barrel that they chose. Additionally, coming out of that barrel was Black Hills Mark II 62. SOCOM originally chose, I believe, another round. I think it was a more obscure grainage, but eventually, because of fulfillment issues, sided with the 77 grain from Black Hills. That said, the Black Hills Mark II 62 is a phenomenal round in both its effectiveness and not even just out of a longer barrel like an 18-inch barrel, but even out of 10.3s. That's right. And a Mark 18 77 grain ammunition gets the job done. Now, the barrel and ammunition aside, the other piece of the puzzle for a rifle like this would be the glass, which at the time they were using a 3.5 to 10 power Leupold Mark IV. Now, a 10 power magnification is nothing to slouch at. However, there are pros to more magnification. It's a little bit of a balance. You don't want to have too much magnification, otherwise you can get kind of lost in the sauce on what it is that you're trying to shoot at and so on. The ability to make more refined shots or have higher PID capability at least is very valuable. Now, in further contrast to what units are being issued at the time, like M4s, M16s, the Mark 12 had an issued suppressor. Most often, it was the Allen Engineering AEM5 suppressor, which is still a remarkable suppressor to this day. It's very effective, very quiet, does a lot of good for your signature reduction. That said, that is the gist, that is the short of the Mark 12. I can go on and on about it, but it'll get a little too off base for this video. Now, if we look at these attributes, such as barrel, ammunition choice, glass, suppressor, few more, but those are the big four. We can replicate, or rather build our own special purpose rifle, which I have done right here. The specifics of this rifle, you guys, we have a 16-inch barrel and a Knights Armament upper receiver. So Knights Armament bolt carrier group, that'll be the upper receiver itself, gas system, everything basically besides the flash hider, as that is a surefire flash hider we're using. But as for the lower, we have an LMT, Mars L. It is an ambidextrous lower receiver, which I have found to be very handy, especially for prone shooting. However, it is not a necessity. So long as your lower receiver is in spec, it is simply a vessel for your trigger group. Now, moving down the rifle, we do have a B5 Precision adjustable stock. Offers an adjustable butt pad, adjustable cheek riser. That said, stocks have come a long way. Even at the time, the Mark 12 was initially issued with a fixed, I believe, A1 stock. And a lot of folks would transition that out for a Crane Sob Mod by LMT. Now, the comfort of your stock, you guys, should not be underestimated. The ability to adjust your cheek weld or the length of pull. After a long day of being on the gun, it can make a difference. Not having to tire yourself out, whether it's just kind of craning your neck in a weird position or having to squint your eyes because you're not quite in that, that eye box you want to be in. These things will affect your performance over time. So being comfortable as you can be when you're shooting a long distance will pay dividends in your performance. So that aside, we do have a Magpul grip. This is the K2 XL, which is just basically a K2 grip, but it's a little bit bigger and it's more vertical. And I found that for my bone structure, I suppose, it's far more comfortable. Now, moving forward, we do have a Geisley SS-AEX. This is the lightning bow trigger. And it is a very light trigger. It is very crisp, very repeatable trigger, but importantly, it's a 2-stage. If you're on a sort of a budget, I recommend the LaRue MBT2S. It offers a great break and great reset, and I would consider it, duty grade. Now, moving forward on the rifle, we do have a bipod. This is an Atlas CAL bipod, and I'm a huge fan of it. I was using bipods from Harris and the Magpul one for a little while, and eventually decided to kind of splurge on something that's a little nicer, and I would 100% recommend it. So for features, we have one-hand adjustment. Instead of having to hold your bipod and hold the adjustment at the same time, with one hand, if I'm down with the rifle, I can just use my thumb, bring it down, bring it back up, whatever the case may be. Additionally, unlike a Harris, we have 5 positions. So we can start at the very front like this, flat, horizontally, or the very back for just weight reasonings, I suppose. But we can also bring it to these 45-degree positions like this. If you're in the middle of some trees or some rocks, just a weird piece of terrain, the ability to set your bipod up exactly where you need it to be in that perfect position to where you're comfortable is very, very, again, underrated. Because not straining your muscles, not straining your body, you're just adding unnecessary inputs into your rifle system is going to do you a lot of good in terms of your performance. Now, despite the handguard being M-LOK, I did opt for a Picatinny mount just because it is much easier to remove and to attach whenever you need to. With a direct to M-LOK or direct to key mod attachment, it can take more time or just be much more of a pain to remove or to reattach your bipod in the field. Now, above the bipod, I'm sure you've noticed we have a suppressor. Much like the Mark 12 had an AEM5 suppressor, it's a full-size 5.56 dedicated suppressor. This is a full-size dedicated 5.56 suppressor. It is a Surefire RC2, but the make and model aside, let's talk about suppressors for a minute. On top of obviously reducing your decibel volume of gunshot, you also serve to displace the sound of the gunshot. So if someone doesn't see the gunshot go off, if they're not facing the shooter, they might be entirely misled on the location of the shooter. They could think that it came from the opposite side of the canyon or the city block, whatever it is. And in my opinion, and it's kind of a rifle, a DMR, sniper rifle, whatever it is that you're using, your signature is literally everything. And if you read through the literature of conflicts, you often see that suppressors are surprisingly underutilized, especially in night vision. If you're using night vision in a state that allows you to have a suppressor, it is a duo. They go hand in hand. Now, to add to the visual signature, guys, a quality flash hider, of course, will reduce the flash during the day, and it'll really do its job at night. But that said, even then, especially under the IR spectrum, under night vision, a quality flash hider does not hide everything. Again, in a fighting rifle, if you're using night vision, just as a user of night vision, reducing the amount that your night vision will auto-gate due to those large fireballs and flashes and so on, adding a suppressor really helps with that. Now, suppressors aside, because I know not everybody can get a suppressor due to state, local laws, or cost of entry, or whatever the circumstances are, it is definitely worth speaking on the muzzle devices that you can choose from. Most commonly, be a flash hider or a muzzle brake or a comp. Speaking of flash hiders and muzzle brakes, because that's most likely one or the other you'll end up with. There's pros and cons of both, and obviously I've made my decision here, so I'll kind of speak on why I've done that. A flash hider, a good flash hider, will reduce flash. It might even have some built-in properties to reduce recoil like a Surefire War Comp. That said, those are not the best suppressor hosts due to carbon fouling, increasing carbon lock. Now, a muzzle brake, what are the pros? Well, obviously it's going to make the gun flatter. even a 5.56 gun, right? It's a soft recoil impulse, relatively speaking. It'll make that gun flatter, and that's obviously very, very nice. That said, there are a lot of cons. Number one, obviously, you create a large fireball if you're not suppressed. That fireball, while making the gun flatter, so on and so forth, I mean, there's benefits, right? While making the gun flatter, you're creating a large fireball. And if you use night vision at all, that is not your friend. And even if you don't use night vision, again, in a combative environment, that can give away your position. Now, one of the often brought up pros to a muzzle brake is that it can act as a sacrificial baffle if you're using it as a suppressor host. And while there is some truth to that, as a sacrificial baffle, in theory, you're lengthening the lifespan of the suppressor, right? That said, if you have a quality suppressor, like a Surefire suppressor, they're known for going well above 100,000 rounds. And in my opinion, the odds of you shooting 100,000 rounds, let alone on one gun, on one suppressor, is very unlikely. So again, the cons certainly outweigh the pros there for a muzzle brake for me. That said, again, due to your state, local laws, whatever it is, you might choose a muzzle brake, and that is what it is. But I just want to give you guys the full picture, as full of a picture that I can bring you, so you can make your own judgments and make your own choices. Now, having saved best for last, you guys, let's discuss the optics package on this rifle. We have a Leupold Mark V HD. This is the 3.6 to 18 power variant. And on top, we have a Aimpoint Acro P2. But let's talk on the Mark V for a bit. Now, the Mark V, you guys, is an incredible optic. And don't just take my opinion for it. There are plenty of other shooters who are more renowned and talented than I who also hold it in high regard. That said, why did I choose it? We have just about 30 mils of elevation adjustment. And as you can hear, they're very, very tactile and audible. And for those of you who are not aware, this is going to be great for you as you go out to distance. Not only can you hold on the optic reticle, which in this guy we have a Tremor 3, not only can you hold on the reticle, you can dial that elevation. So as you get further and further and you can no longer hold, dialing becomes essential. And this offers plenty of elevation to dial with. Now, one of the features of the scope that brought it to my attention was the parallax adjustment. While most modern optics sort of magnification range, they usually have a parallax adjustment. But LPVOs generally don't, which is another reason that I kind of put them on the chopping block, so to say, for our purposes. But this rifle has a parallax adjustment. And for those of you who are unsure what parallax is, in short, it is the effect of an unclear image out to distance, and not just an unclear image, but also imperfect positioning on your part as a shooter can mislead you into thinking that your target, whether it's you're using a crosshair style reticle or a red dot, you think that you have your reticle on the target, but you actually don't. So you start missing shots, you start correcting, making different calls, dialing, so on and so forth, when in reality, it was your parallax. Just as a brief example, if I'm shooting out to 100 yards or so, and then I want to transition to a target that's at 500 yards, if I'm looking through the scope, it's going to be very unclear, very blurry. The muscles in my eyes will strain to try and get a clear sight picture. But with the parallax adjustment, all I need to do is roll it back to 500, 600, whatever it is, and the image will sharpen and clear up. And again, that just makes my shooting out to those distances much easier. Now, one of the last things we'll speak on as it pertains to the Mark V is the magnification. This is again 3.6 to 18 power. That is nearly double what the issued Mark IV offered on the Mark 12 20 odd years ago. Now, while 10 power magnification is definitely doable out to even 1,000 yards, it definitely makes it easier for you as a shooter if you can get much closer in on that target. That said, more magnification is not always the answer. Sometimes you want to be at a little bit less so you have a wide field of view and you can find your targets a little bit easier. But being able to go further into magnification, like at 18 power, it allows me as a shooter to hold onto a particular spot on the target, like say a left shoulder or like a right hip, whatever it might be, where with a lower power optic, my crosshair might entirely occlude the entire target. So I can't really hold one way or the other. So food for thought, you guys. Now, our primary optic out of the way, we can talk about the secondary optic. Offset red dots, you guys, whether they're mounted 12 o'clock or 45 degrees, some variation of the sort, they're nothing new. They've been around for quite some time. And at the time of the Mark 12 being in service, you could even find offset RMRs. So why do people use them? There's a few reasons. Number one is that if you're doing any night vision shooting, you can't really do it with a magnified optic, not effectively. So a red dot lets you do that. Additionally, when I'm in the magnification range, right, say I'm at, I will say 18 power, and I can't find my target because I'm so into that field of view. It's so narrow. Instead of having to dial back on a magnification, I can bring my head up, use the red dot overlaid over the target, pop my cheek back down, and there's pretty good probability that I'll be, if not right on top of it, in the general area. So passive night vision use and reference point aside, we do have obviously a close engagement optic. Making those close engagement shots with 18 power is not ideal, let alone with 3.6 power. So having a 1x red dot just kind of, I would say, enhances the rifle's capability. Again, we're not trying to compromise ourselves at the close-in ranges, but we're also trying to excel at the far ones. So it's kind of a tricky balance. And in my mind, adding a couple of ounces with a offset red dot is a good way to kind of mend that gap. And once again, you don't have to buy an Aimpoint P2 or T2 or an expensive optic like this. You can always go with an RMR or a Holosun. It's all personal preference. That said, on my carry gun, I do have an Aimpoint. The guns that I use out in the range that have offset dots, they have Aimpoints. So I kind of see value for me in keeping the same footprint. So whatever optic you decide to go with to offset from your rifle, I would consider making it the same or identical optic that you're using on your carry gun or your offset, ACOG, LPVO setup. All of that aside, you guys, one of the last things that it does is it provides an offset aiming solution, because even the Mighty Mark V can fail. Really, everything has a failure point. I had my original Mark V and it did have a warranty issue. They took care of it. That said, the rifle was no longer functional. So in a combative environment, in a duty use setup, whatever it is, if your primary optic fails, the rifle is basically worthless. It's a large paperweight. So having a secondary offset red dot or offset iron sights, whatever it is, I would encourage you to do so, because they only add ounces. And it's a little bit of a, I would say, a little bit of a gooseneck thing you got to do to kind of get up there. But if you train around it enough, it is absolutely usable. And again, I've had great success with it, both with passive use under night vision and under daylight use. Now, one of the last parts of the rifle you get to speak on is the bubble level, which you may or may not have noticed already. This is a Knight's armament bubble level, and I've chosen it because it mounts directly onto the receiver instead of onto the scope rings or in the scope body itself. So in my mind, it's just a more independent and safer bet to gauge my stability off of. Additionally, the same way I can bring my P2 into my view by just raising my cheek up, I don't even have to do that. When I'm in that scope, just by looking down, I can tell immediately where I'm off by, if I'm off by anything. This bubble level has been enough for me. It's been accurate enough for me. It's been reliable. That said, there is of course other options out there, and whatever you end up going with, I would just encourage you to get one, because again, in precision shooting, we want to be consistent, and this is going to help us in that. So it's just something to consider. Now, the rifle aside, let's discuss ammunition. In this rifle, I've had great success with the Black Hills Mark II 62 ammunition. Again, 77 grain boat tail open tip match round. This is a phenomenal round. Again, it's what they use in the Mark 12. So what I would encourage you to do, if you haven't gone out and done it yet already, is buy a box of 20 rounds of, say, your Hornady, your Federal Gold Medal Match, your Black Hills, your IMI, and so on. Buy 20 rounds of each. Go out there, get some groups. Whether it's a 7-shot group, 9-shot, people kind of say different things, but you can kind of get a good idea on what your rifle is performing the best with. So again, you go out there to the range, set up your rifle, get a little warm, fire a couple of rounds, then put out that group. Let your rifle then wait a little bit, maybe 10, 20 minutes, depending on what the ambient conditions are. And then after that, you'll shoot your next group. It'll take a little bit of time, but you're getting good data out of it. And with that data in mind, you can then determine what kind of accuracy is the best for your particular barrel, and also what ammunition makes sense for you. Which brings me to another point on ammunition, you guys. If the ammunition is too expensive for you to reliably source, or let alone shoot, you want to look at what is. So if you take a little bit of a hit in terms of your accuracy, that group opens up a little bit, but it's much cheaper or it's easier to source for you, especially in times of like panic buying and whatnot, I would encourage you to probably go with that option instead. Because if you have the most accurate round in the world for your zero, but you don't train on it, or it's not available to you when you actually need that rifle, it doesn't do you any good. So again, test ammunition, get the best that you can that makes sense with your budget, the availability of it, and so on and so forth. Now, the ammunition aside, let's discuss a couple of accessories and then wrap up the video. One accessory I'd encourage you to look into for stability and for this kind of shooting is a tripod. Now, this is admittedly an area of ignorance of mine that I'm working on. That said, A tripod is a phenomenal piece of equipment that well, takes a bit of time to kind of refine what it is that you need out of a tripod. There are a lot of tripods out there, and again, your particular needs will vary. They do take up quite a bit of space, but you can get some very compact ones, some shorter ones, and again, if you use it enough, you can make it work for you. I've seen good success. If you're going to carry a tripod, carry a pack. It's going to make it a lot easier for you to just be mobile with it. But if you plan on being in a static position for whatever the reason is, a tripod is the king of stability and comfort for you as a shooter. So again, as it pertains to tripods, you guys, this is just a bit of information for you to go out there and do your own research. If you have any questions, please don't ask me about tripods. I'm not that guy.
You're not that guy, pal. Trust me. You're not that guy.
There's plenty of people out there who have much more experience, whether it's professional or recreational, whatever it is, and they can answer your questions much better than I can. Now, some other things to look into, you guys. I recommend that you start looking into a bag setup. For me, it's been the Armageddon Gear Game Changer. There's a lot of options out there, but this particular bag offers a unique shape. So whether I'm using it on a barricade, on a post, or on a rock, whatever it might be, it just really does a good job at conforming to it and gives me a very stable position. They make several different versions. I mean, whether you go with a large size like this one right here, or a medium, a small, a waxed, Cordura material. There's a lot of options out there, and not just with them, but with most other people. You can kind of do your own research. That said, bags are incredibly stable, and I would say it makes shooting, almost easier with that than a bipod or even a tripod. Now, one of the other pieces of equipment that I recommend you invest into, even for non-precision shooters, is a rangefinder. And they can be very expensive, I'm aware of that. However, they can also be very, very cheap, or affordable rather. This is a Vortex Ranger 1800. I believe they're now discontinued. That said, with an MSRP of around $300 a four, I did pick this one up like a year ago for $200. And it's been well accommodating for my needs out to just under 1,000 yards. I think 980 was the furthest reading I got back with it. So that said, it's been accurate, it's been dependable. I've not been gentle with it. I've only changed the battery once in a year of use. It happened just last month. And all in all, it's been a great rangefinder for my needs. And again, if you're not a precision shooter, you're not going out beyond 300, 500, 1,000 yards, you don't think you need a rangefinder. But honestly, it is a good thing for you to invest into, if not for somebody in your shooting group to invest into. That way you can accurately judge distance, and that way you can also properly get the distance on your outdoor zeros. If you can't go to an indoor range to get that perfect 25, 50 yard zero, 100 yard, whatever it is, a rangefinder will help you do that. The more serious that you become into this sort of shooting, basically the more expensive it becomes, just because there's more equipment that you can invest into that'll make your job much easier. So again, like a Kestrel is a ballistic calculator where you can input all the data on your rifle, the grainage of the bullet, the size, the offset of the scope, all these sorts of things that affect where your bullet is going to go and what it's going to do. There's a lot of equipment out there. And again, Kestrels, quality rangefinders that pair well together and share profiles and readings. These things are all very helpful. Once again, you guys, this is another area of my own ignorance, so I cannot go too deep into Kestrels and that sort of stuff. Eventually I'll invest into one, but I have not had the need to yet, which for you guys who are just trying to break into this kind of shooting is a good thing, because all you need to do, you guys, is invest into a quality rifle, a quality optic, and just have some time out there at the range and see what works best for you. You can make hits out to 800, 1,000, 1,200 yards with 5.56. And I know people are going to say, just because you can doesn't mean that you should. And I agree with that. There are better tools for those jobs. But once again, that's what most people consider a long range, anything beyond 800 or 1,000 yards for sure. And if you can do that with your DPMS at home, your Smith & Wesson, your Geisley that has an LPVO, just by changing out the optic or investing in different ammunition, I consider that pretty amazing. Because again, you guys, the Mark 12, despite being like 20 odd years old, is not very different from the modern AR-15 that you might have in your closet or in your safe. Your Smith & Wesson, your Geisley, your Daniel Defense, whatever it's outfitted with, if you change just the optic, just the ammunition, or invest into a different barrel, you can have a world of difference in your capability. So it might seem a little expensive. I mean, the ammunition is expensive. That said, it's not as expensive as you might think it is. And I find it to be very fulfilling and a lot of fun for my training. With all that said, I want to thank you all so much for sticking around to the end of the video. It really does mean a lot. That said, if you have any questions, you have any thoughts, things you agreed with or disagreed with, I look forward to hearing it down below and interacting with you guys. You can always reach me through Instagram, that is through Dim Desert Nights, where I have some other content up there already, some reviews, some thoughts, that sort of stuff. And if you like the video, please consider liking, subscribing, and with all that said, thank you again for watching. Please be safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one.